Welcome back to Girl Take the Lead, the podcast where we reimagine leadership, challenge the status quo, and share the real, raw, and meaningful conversations that help us break cycles, find our voice, and lead with intention. And I'm your host, Yo Canny. If you're listening at a moment when your life feels full, your work is demanding, your responsibilities are heavy, and you're carrying more than you can name, you're not alone. And this conversation is arriving at exactly the right time. Today's episode isn't about pushing harder or fixing yourself. It's about capacity, the kind that comes from learning to work with your nervous system, not against it. I'm so pleased to welcome Kathryn Spears, a Neuro Somatic Practitioner who specializes in high performance regulation for women whose nervous systems are carrying a lot. Kathryn supports senior leader, founders, change makers, and disruptors, women holding big careers, big visions, and big responsibilities, often from a place of perceptual tension that society has taught us to normalize. In this conversation, Kathryn helps us understand why chronic stress isn't just a mindset problem, it's a full body state shift, and why so many of the things we blame ourselves for, overwhelm, perfectionism, imposter syndrome, procrastination, are often protective patterns that once kept us safe. She also shows us what it looks like to lead with clarity, sustainability, and true internal capacity, not burnout. Let's jump in. Here you go. So, Kathryn, welcome to Girl Take the Lead. We're so excited to have this conversation with you. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm very excited to be here today.
Yeah. So let's start if you would introduce yourself to our viewers and listeners.
Absolutely. So, I'm Kathryn. I'm on the East Coast of Canada, and I am a neurosomatic practitioner. And a lot of people think somatics, but really it does lean heavier on applied neurology. I specialize in supporting high performance regulation for women whose nervous systems are carrying a lot, which truly is most women today. Senior leaders, founders, change makers, disruptors, the ones that are holding big careers, big visions, leading teams while also leading their families and doing it from a place of perpetual tension that we as a society have been taught to normalize. This work is deeply personal for me, based on my own lived experience, where overfunctioning, perfectionism, and survival were really a place that I was leading from,
Mhm.
and holding leadership roles while silently managing my chronic stress,
Mhm.
with decisions made from adrenaline, intimacy and connection guarded by hypervigilance, burnout disguised as ambition. So I know what it means to perform.
You've gone down the path.
Yeah, I know what it means to perform while also like silently kind of feeling like I was dying inside. So now that's what I do. I really support women in those roles, and bring a very deeply specialized lens, for nervous system optimization and very intricate, unique to them support.
Mm. I would think a lot of us aren't tuned into our nervous system.
That's exactly it. We are, as humans, so adaptive. We just adapt subconsciously, and then our new baseline and our new state becomes the norm for us.
Mhm.
And so we can really start to kind of see through that with, our feelings, our behaviors, our chronic fatigue, our pain, our jaw tension, our snappiness at the end of the day, our being able
What?
to, right, hold it all together while at work, and then the fallout happening like in the hallway when your kid asks for one more thing, or your husband needs something else, or you have a friend in distress and feeling yourself like, how am I ever going to support this person while I can barely support myself?
Yeah.
So yeah, yeah.
So you talked a little bit about chronic stress and that response. Talk a little bit more about that and what role it plays in our system and maybe even in who we become. Because you kind of
Mm.
said, we kind of normalize it.
It does. And the part that's so fascinating is the chronic stress response isn't just about feeling anxious or feeling stressed. It is a full body cascade state shift that is happening internally in all of your systems. It's a systemic shift that happens. And that systemic shift is governed by the nervous system. And so many of us rely on mindset and think that that will be supportive, but you can't mindset your way out of actually a state shift and change in the body. And because the brain is so predictive, it could perceive threat when cognitively you're like, no, I'm safe, I'm okay.
Mhm.
And then it reroutes control. And the shift is in an instant, right? So the hypothalamus activates the HPA axis, which floods the system with cortisol and adrenaline. Your heart rate spikes, your breath moves up into your chest. The blood flow leaves the digestive and reproductive systems and gets shunted to the limbs, and you might have sweaty palms, a lump in your throat, a catch in your voice. And then as time goes on, we stop actually feeling those sensations because it becomes our baseline. It's not safe to feel your heart rate racing when we're going to get up and speak in front of people or say something that is disruptive. So, what ends up happening is the state becomes the baseline. We don't realize it. And all of that state shift is happening behind the scenes. And then that attributes to our long term health and wellness. And then, of course, society reinforces it all. So,
Yeah. So it seems to me that we hear like a little bit of adrenaline is going to help you. Like,
mhm.
like there's some safe measure that you can actually have
Yes.
that makes you perform better. But is your thinking there like, no, then like when does it become a problem?
Right. So we need all of these functions to actually survive and walk the earth as humans.
Mhm.
Where the problem starts to become a real problem is when we don't modulate out of the stress response. So what ends up happening is it keeps going, right? The it all keeps spiking. The cortisol keeps spiking. And then what ends up happening is because we're predictive, and we get really good at what we practice, like we breathe without knowing, when someone
Mhm.
says something to us and we can't hear them, we lean in subconsciously to hear what they're saying. That happens at a physiological level. So it becomes the state norm, it becomes the baseline. And when we're not modulating in and out of our stress response, and we're stuck in the fight, flight, freeze, fawn, or flop of our stress responses, that's when it becomes problematic because it's changing all of our major systems, right? Like our heart rate is constantly elevated. It'll impact our cholesterol, our blood pressure. Um, our sleep,
Mhm.
our fatigue, all of these things. And so it's just so important to be able to modulate through it. And I had no idea, I was like, oh, I'm fine. After the end of the day at work, I'm just like moving into another stressful situation with my two young kids back in the day, right? I
Yeah.
mean, they're still young, but in the early days of, having the kids, it's a whole other ball game, right?
Yeah, it sure is. Um, so is that what kind of happens to high functioning, performing women, especially that we get kind of stuck and we
Yeah,
see?
that's exactly it. And the high performance is often an adaptive pattern that we learned as children. Like it often comes coupled with overworking, over high achieving, overachieving, perfectionist tendencies,
Mhm.
which really start to come into play when we feel like, we have to prove our worth. And so we
Mhm.
do that by increasing our outputs and then we become burnt out. Now, I want to caveat by saying I still very much identify with being a very high achieving, successful woman and not at the detriment of myself. And so that's the difference, right? Is when we're not working with our nervous system and that cascade of events is happening with the state shift, we're really working against ourselves because all of those things are happening behind the scenes and we're depleting ourselves faster. So if we can start to create safety around those things versus it being necessary for us to quote unquote survive, then we get more into like a flow state and we can show up without all of the fallout from showing up in our authentic selves of like chronic fatigue, you know,
Hmm.
headaches, muscle tension, pain,
Hmm.
restless sleep, burnout, all of those things. So those are really happening because we're overriding our body's internal signals and we're just going to keep going and plow through. And then eventually the body's like, no, no, no,
Yeah,
we
yeah,
can't keep going, right?
exactly. Um, I know Brene Brown makes this distinction between stress and overwhelm. Do
Mhm.
you as well? Like, do you see some stress like normal and others like when you're saying we're in this pattern, the chronic stress, and we're not giving ourselves, is it that we're not giving ourselves a chance to, um, when you say modulate ourselves, is
Mm.
that like getting ourselves kind of back in touch with center?
Very much so. And it is really completing the stress cycle. And so, a really simple way to complete the stress cycle, because again, we need that stress, is like whole body tapping, just giving stimulus to our body. And what that does is in our bones, we have something called osteocalcin. And when we, like create that vibrating impact on our bones, especially in like major areas like our diaphragm, our legs, what ends up happening is the osteocalcin is released, and that's the signal to our brain of like, hey, the stress is complete, it's over, and
Mm.
then we go back to homeostasis. We move out of that stress response. And then as far as the overwhelm, to me, overwhelm is often a sign that we're in a protective response because we're feeling so overwhelmed that we start to kind of like spin, right? And we're
Uh-huh.
not actually getting the things done that we want. And so, in that moment, by creating that safety at a physiological level, because again, we can cognitively or intellectually be like, I'm safe in this moment, everything's fine. But
Mhm.
our nervous system doesn't speak English. So it's giving it an input of like, hey, we're safe. And that overwhelm is really there to protect us and stop us, just like procrastination or the imposter syndrome. It's really meant to like stop us from moving forward, but we don't want to be stopped, right? So it's creating the regulation and shifting so that we can meet our edges and do the scary thing without it taking a toll on
Yeah.
our body. So like I can show up here today and be visible and for my and share, my thoughts, my perspectives, the science behind it. And I can feel like that heartbeat when I get on. And it's really scary. For the longest time, I did these and didn't feel a thing, right?
Right.
Because it wasn't safe. And now I just have the tools to be able to modulate through it because I want to be able to show up, right? Like we don't
Uh-huh.
want it to be an excuse not to. We just need to have the tools to be able to modulate through. And so we can often see through our thoughts, our feelings, and our behaviors when we're in a stress response and have no idea. And usually it's when those protective things come into play and the underlying thing is fear.
Yeah.
And feeling that fear and moving through that fear. And it doesn't have to be this big, cathartic, massive process, right? It's
Yeah.
just indicating to the nervous system in the language that it understands is like, hey, we're safe, we're good, we're gonna do this. And again, not in English. It's just like in the systems that it's interpreting in. So yeah,
Yeah. So interesting. I'm just trying to
I know, right?
catch every part of it. You mentioned something about imposter syndrome, and I know my listeners have, we've done a few episodes about that. But what you're saying is it's giving us a clue.
Yeah, just like the inner critic, and really it's meant to be protective because at the foundational level of being a human being, we need connection. And a lot of times, Gabor Mate talks a lot about attachment and connection. And a lot of times, or sorry, authenticity and connection. And a lot of times we abandon our own authenticity and our own needs to remain connected to the herd. And
Mm-hmm.
so when I was bullied as a kid, my imposter syndrome and my perfectionism and my inner critic was really there to support me and to help me try to maintain connection socially with the herd.
Wow.
They've made fun of my hair. Okay, I'm going to change my hair. I'm going to put more makeup on. I'm
Right.
going to try to gain their acceptance to remain connected. But in so many of those moments, what ends up happening is we self-abandon. Like maybe I don't want
Mhm.
my hair to be that color or that style. And so it's building the capacity of being able to speak your truth. This comes into play with boundaries as well, to to release and let go of the outcome by being present and being your authentic self and knowing that it will magnetize the people that are meant to and repel the people that aren't meant to. And then you're surrounded by the right humans, right?
Yeah.
But in the developmental years, like we don't have the altitude for that, right? It's literally how do we survive? And this is how we do it. And then those patterns become baked into our nervous system as neurotags. And then we live them out subconsciously as adults.
Yeah, I wish I could take a couple of those neuro tags and change them. It's
That's
like
it. And that's the beautiful piece is that we are neuroplastic human beings, so we can shift
change them.
shift those patterns.
Yeah.
Um, it just takes time and
Yeah.
yeah,
Well,
capacity. So,
you talked a little bit about modulating through the stress, and you mentioned tapping, like
mhm.
the signal to tell ourselves it's okay, that stress is over. Um, what else are other things that come up for people to how to deal with the stress? Like I write, like I'll get a journal and I'll just go, whoa, let's
Right.
get it
Yes.
all out, just so I could observe it and see it. But what other tools or things do you see that are helpful to people? I mean, the other thing I do is I talk to myself.
Yes. Yeah. Verbal processing is so helpful. Absolutely.
Like I'll just go, girlfriend, it's okay. It's like almost my little girl. I like give her a big hug and go, you're safe. It's wonderful. It's okay. We're going to handle this one like an adult, So,
Yes.
but what else? Do you have some other thoughts?
Yeah, I think a lot about really thinking about that state shift. So, what is happening at a physiological level?
Hmm.
And being in the body, which I'll be very transparent. At the beginning of my journey, that was like, what? There's no chance. You want me to tap in? As soon as I tried to tap into my body or feel any sensations, I moved into another stress response. I was like, oop, I'm out. I dissociate, I flight, I fight. Like, why would you ever want me to do this? And so this is where that minimum effective dose really comes into play, and finding what works for you to create that state shift. But this is where the applied neurology piece comes into play of the neurosomatics. Because when moment by moment our brain is deciding safe or unsafe below our level of consciousness, it's doing it through a number of gatekeeping systems, our visual system, our balancing system, our body map system. And so in applied neurology, I work to clear those maps in those different systems. And what that does is it creates safety at the level of the physiology that the nervous system understands so it can choose safe in situations where it was previously choosing unsafe and creating these outputs. So it becomes that physiological state change. And we do this through measurement, the assess and reassess process, so that we can really tailor to an individual's nervous system. Because I could sit here and say, how does that make you feel? And again, your performative, people pleasing tendencies and rose colored glasses will come into play, right? Of like,
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
think that feels better, I think that feels better, but like, does it? Does it really? Did it really create change at the level of your physiology, which is the piece that really matters because that's
Yeah.
what's creating the cascade of outputs. And so that's really where I work. So with the applied neurology and the somatics of like moving into the body. But again, at a minimum effective dose, because for some people, just getting there and going there too fast, too soon creates just another stress response, which
Yeah.
reinforces that physiological state we're trying to work against.
Well, and it also seems like it almost has to be custom developed for each of your clients because each of us have a different history, a different way that we've developed ourselves, right?
That's exactly it. So I mean, I generically, like I work in generically the same systems, um, but the tools that we use are very different because
Mhm.
they're the same tools, um, but not for everyone, you know? So I
Mhm.
have my
Mhm.
toolkit and then I would work with someone to find first we find high payoff tools. And that's where we know that the nervous system's systemic immediate response is very positive. So we start only with those really hyper positive tools because that's basically us signaling we're safe at a physiological state and we're okay in a language that the nervous system understands in one of those systems. And
Mhm.
then the more that we create that felt sense of safety at a physiological level, it allows for that expansion in the nervous system for that state change. And then from there, we move into some like rehabilitation, and then into the somatic kind of stress processing and emotional processing of it. You know, we go through so many situations where we're like, that's fine, it's no big deal. Cognitively, I know it's not a big deal. You might still feel it, or you might be ruminating or worrying about it. Those are signs when we're getting into our head, we're moving out of our body, and we really do need to process it in our body. And again, it doesn't need to be this big cathartic,
Yeah.
massive practice, right?
Yeah. Well, you mentioned Gabor Mate, and I'll have that in the show notes for folks. Is addiction kind of the loop is just really stuck in the neuro pathway and
Yeah, it's very protective. And at a foundational level for the brain, like the number one job is to keep us alive and save energy stores, right? So if you think about when you're face to face with a bear in the woods, like everything shuts down, we preserve our energy because we may not know when we're going to eat again. We go
Mhm.
into that like very survival response that's happening now day to day. You know, maybe we get an email or we catch a glimpse between two people and we think it's about us or what have you. And so habit change and change at the level of the brain is very energetically, like from an energy in glucose perspective, taxing, which is why so many people want to make the change and then the change doesn't happen, or we have the
Mhm.
intent to make a change and it's not happening. And that really comes from like that physiological capacity and resource
Yeah.
and protective output from the brain. You know, it is safer for us to stay in the present where we can predict versus moving into something unknown where we can't make a prediction. When the brain can't make a prediction for change, that's very, very threatening to the brain. And so that's often what happens, yes, in habit change or addiction, where
Mhm.
we
Mhm.
are really in that survival state and it's very hard to make a habitual change. And so that is where this physiological state change is so important because we resource at a physiological level. We create capacity at a physiological level. And then we have these tools beyond our mindset to tap in very easily because it's a low cognitive load and we know it's what the nervous system wants through the measurement to be able to break through and create that state shift change. Does that make
Yeah.
sense? Yeah.
Yes.
It sounds so intricate and so nuanced, and it is, but the application of it is so simple.
Yeah.
Um, you know, it's in the moment, you know, while I'm in the meeting or while I'm on the podcast or when you want to make that change and you're feeling that resistance, you know, that resistance is a beautiful protective response. And when
Yeah.
we have the altitude to know that and learn about that, we're able to kind of separate it from that, like that deep inner critic and shame response that we have, and then
Yeah.
gain that control back over with our
Interesting.
responses. So,
So
yeah,
interesting because
it is.
I think that stress and that chronic stress that you talk about, especially for the high functioning leader,
Mm,
it seems that it becomes so familiar and you don't want to change it, but yet you know you should, quote, should change it. And I think you've helped us see a little bit too about how difficult it is. It may sound very easy to do,
Hmm.
but to catch it and to change the path and the habits that we've created around it, and probably the belief system that's way underneath it, like, oh no, you're supposed to achieve. Oh no, you're supposed to keep going,
Yeah.
right? You're supposed to have everybody like you so that you get a good performance rating. It's like it's
Yeah.
really interesting how you need all those tools to shift it. So,
Yeah,
yeah,
and we're grasping at so many different things. Before I came to this work, it was trying meditation and breath work or therapy or a creative outlet or what have you. And then it would sustain for a very short period of time. But then my nervous system, my protective nervous system it wins every time. You can't
yeah,
win against your nervous system. So being able to actually speak the language of your own unique as a fingerprint nervous system, which is what we do in this work, you can break through just so much faster because you're in lockstep with the
yeah,
system that's running the show, right? And it's so hard because society really normalizes, like, do all these things and you'll be tickety boo, you'll be great. And then what ends up happening is when we don't follow through or we don't do the thing that the mindset book said or change the habit that we wanted to, women are especially skilled at internalizing, right? So then we
yeah,
make it
about us.
about us and it's our faults. And then that reinforces the shame. And there's so much inflammation. It's called shameflammation that comes from the shame response. And it's like that cycle that just keeps repeating itself over
Yeah,
and over and over again. And then society is like, well, read this book or
yeah,
meditate for an hour. And then when we go to do that, it feels impossible. And then again, there's just something wrong with me, and
yeah,
that's just my biggest message is like, no, there's nothing wrong with you. You don't need to be fixed. Your nervous system is doing its job, it's protecting you, and
yeah,
you have these beautiful, incredible goals. You want to disrupt, you want to change and shake up the status quo. Let's do that with your nervous system on board so that you can hold the visibility. You can hold the financial impact of, making more money and all of
yeah.
the things, right? So,
So cool. Is there anything else that we didn't cover that you want to tell our listeners? But because I think you've given us so much to think about and to
yeah,
see differently and to kind of hold things a little bit differently.
I think the biggest thing is you as a listener don't need to be fixed.
Mhm.
Um, it's really just needing to be heard at the level of your nervous system. And that's where the transformation happens when we stop trying to override the body and start really working with it in a very intentional, deep way to be able to interrupt those predictive loops and create that state change that we need with that new stimulus to be able to respond differently, lead differently, choose differently, and not feeling like we're working against ourselves and it's an uphill battle. So, if
Mm,
what you've done has been fleeting, it's not because you're broken. It's just because no one has taught you to speak the language of your own nervous system. And once you do, it's not about healing. It's really about gaining your own liberation and agency back to self.
mm, mm. That's a really great place for us to end today, Kathryn. So, how can our listeners get you,
Yeah,
find you, set an
absolutely.
appointment with you?
Yeah, you can find me at my website, beyondyourmindset.com. And I'm also on LinkedIn and Instagram.
Great. And so, I ask all my guests this question: what would you tell your 20-something self today?
Oh gosh, I would tell her you are doing the very best you can with the capacity that you have, and your nervous system's gotten you this far. Nothing about you's broken. that urgency, that perfection, the need to hold it all makes sense.
Yeah.
Those are beautiful, intelligent adaptations to a world that didn't always feel safe internally. And just to keep following the breadcrumbs and pay attention to those tiny little pulls that say there's a different way, and trust
Mm.
that following those breadcrumbs, will lead you exactly where you're meant to be and share exactly what you're meant to share in the world.
Mm. So good. And lastly, did you get a chance to go to our store so that I can send you a card that spoke to you? Which one spoke to you?
I sure did. The one that I immediately gravitated towards was inspired by your guest, Jen Honkard, and
Uh-huh.
it's the Be You. The Be You, the world will adjust. And I'm like, yes, I love this. The vibrancy of it, the sentiment, it just felt really aligned for me. Yeah.
It's also kind of a messy card. It's so interesting when I did that one because it has a lot of color to it. And the type of um, crayon that I use for it is kind of a big wax based crayon, and it's messy. And I went, oh, this is perfect. This is
It
perfect.
is. It's like bring all of you, the messy parts, the not so messy parts, and everything in between, because the world will adjust if you just be you. It was, yeah, I saw that one and instantly was like, that's the one.
I'm going to definitely send that one to you then, Kathryn.
Oh,
It'll
I
be my
can't wait.
pleasure. But thank you again for joining us and sharing such, I think illuminating came to mind for me. Like, oh, that's a great way to think about that.
Mm,
And to understand how these things all can fit together and we can support ourselves.
yeah. Yeah. Instead of the
That's so
guesswork,
good.
we
Yeah.
we can get to it for us and our own unique selves. So yeah.
Thank you again.
Thank you.
My sincere thanks to Kathryn for joining us with clarity, compassion, and depth, and for reminding us that sustainable leadership isn't about trying harder. It's about learning how to work with the system that's running the show. And if what you've tried hasn't lasted, that doesn't mean you failed. It means no one taught you how to speak the language of your nervous system. Here are 3 takeaways to carry with you. 1, chronic stress isn't just mental. It's a full body state shift that can become your baseline. 2, you don't need to be fixed. Your nervous system has been protecting you. And 3, capacity changes everything. It's how you lead with clarity, presence, and sustainability. If you'd like to connect with Kathryn, check our show notes. We have all of her contact information there. As always, thank you for listening, for sharing these conversations, and for being part of this community that values intention, courage, and heart centered leadership. Coming up next on Girl Take the Lead, I'll be joined by Alexandra Gantier-Hoggart, co founder of Ponderosis, a nonprofit organization dedicated to helping Hispanic women with tools for leadership, personal growth, and entrepreneurial success. Alexandra is also the founder of Empowering Women Global Leaders, where she supports women in stepping into their voice, their leadership, and their next level of impact, personally and professionally. Together, we'll explore what it looks like to lead with purpose, build community, and expand opportunities, especially for women who are done waiting for permission. Until then, take a breath, be gentle with yourself, and remember, you don't have to lead from survival. Talk soon. Bye.